Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Real Parables. I'm Devin here with Graham, and we're from the La Mesa Church of Christ. And today on Real Parables, we are talking about the movie Interstellar, which is one of my favorite films of all time. Graham just saw it for the first time yesterday.
Yes.
How'd
I
you
probably
like
won't be talking as much as I normally would because
Yeah,
it's a lot to take in.
it is a lot to take in.
It's a great movie. A lot of complex storylines that are there. It's usually you kind of hype these movies up. You know, it's one of those movies that it's not that I didn't want to see it. It was I was waiting for the opportunity to see it, which is just kind of hard to watch these kind of movies with a house full of people and kids always making noise, so you can't really listen to anything. And if you turn the surround sound up too loud, you get in trouble for it being too loud, and then everybody just talks over it, and it's just
I cranked it yesterday.
Yeah. So I had wanted to see it, and I think I had kind of hyped it up a little bit in my brain. And it's one of those movies that actually lived up to the hype. So it was good.
So if you haven't seen it before, spoiler alert as usual, because we're going to talk about the movie for the next hour
Extensively.
But if you have seen it, just a quick recap of what's basically happening in the movie is there's this character, Cooper, who is a single dad who's a farmer but used to be an astronaut, or at least
engineer.
worked at NASA as an engineer. And the world kind of doesn't need engineers anymore because the world has slowly started to be depleted of all its nutrients, and there's kind of a Dust Bowl scenario happening, or potato famine of sorts happening worldwide. There's only a couple crops left that are surviving. Basically, corn is like the last of the
healthiest one.
Yeah, of surviving edible foods. And it was funny, like looking at like the food that they're eating at meals, and it's just like cornbread, corn souffle, like corn everything. Like that's got to be such a boring palate.
Always horrible.
But basically, Cooper and his daughter Murph end up discovering that there's this strange gravitational occurrence that leads them to NASA, who they thought didn't exist anymore. And after talking with NASA, they want Coop to go into a wormhole off of Saturn and hopefully find a new world for everybody to live at. And it's a awesome, if you like space like I do, it's just a fun movie for that. Very intense, great soundtrack. Hans Zimmer is I think the king of soundtracks.
Well, and scientifically, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, this is one of the more scientifically accurate space movies.
It's a pretty cool movie.
I mean, it's theoretical space movies,
Yeah.
but the theories are at least in line with actual science.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you haven't actually listened to our podcast before, what we try to do is take these movies that we're watching and try to pull parables from them, because that's what we kind of feel like Jesus would do if he lived today. When he was creating these parables back in biblical times, it was to help people to understand his biblical truths in a more reasonable way to understand it. The Pharisees liked to talk big and confuse people, but Jesus wanted to break it down simple, and that's what we like to do too, is break some Christian lessons down simply by some great movies.
Simple as possible.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. A little bit hurtful, but very true.
So starting out near the beginning of this movie, there's this quote by, I think it's the principal or one of the teachers at the school that Coop's kids go to. They say, "We didn't run out of TVs, we ran out of food," which is, I think, pretty funny, because that's kind of what I think a lot of people care about right now, is the technology and how far tech's coming out. When's the next iPhone going to come out?
Yeah.
What are the new features? How good is that camera going to be? Because the cameras on the iPhones are pretty amazing. I mean, the camera that's recording this right now is an iPad, which is better camera quality than the HD camera that we bought.
The $3,000 camera that we bought 2 years ago.
It's crazy. So humans are so focused on technology that overpopulation and depletion of nutrients has basically just robbed Earth of food. I think they're talking about blight being a big issue too, which I think is a fungal
Yeah.
issue. Uh, but Earth is being depleted of nutrients, and it made me think a lot about where we're at now because I think this is happening in the year like 2067. I think is what I looked up. Which is not too far in the future. Where do you think right now our priorities are as humans and as Christians?
Well, I think we like to think that we are concerned with the environment, we're concerned with the world, that we're concerned with the future, but I don't think we really are. I think most of us are just concerned with right now. We're concerned with how am I going to pay for gas at the gas pump?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a big issue right now.
yeah. How am I going to, um, you know, how am I going to pay for my kids' braces? Or, you know, I have a daughter that needed $3,000 worth of dental work, you know, and our dental plan only covers $1,000. So,
Yep.
you know, you're kind of left stuck. And I think that's what, and it's different for a lot of people, but we end up worrying about the right now. There's not very many people that are thinking about the future. And I think that's kind of where the people in this movie are. You know, they say,
Yeah.
well, we don't need engineers. We need farmers.
Yeah.
But the reality is, well, yeah, farmers help you right now, but, you know, agricultural engineers might be able to help you in the future.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's just kind of the perspective that I think so much what happens in our world today is we're thinking about the here and now instead of, you know, the big picture ideas. I mean, in this movie, clearly there are people who are thinking about the big picture view of things. But as Christians, you know, we have to do our best to not be so focused on today. Because if we're only focused on today, then we're going to have some pretty miserable times ahead of us.
Yeah.
If we don't do the preparation that we need to for tomorrow.
Yeah. Jesus talks about, like, in the scripture, like, let tomorrow's problems be tomorrow. But I don't think he was saying, like, just don't
ever think about it.
Don't think about your future, like, at all.
No.
Yeah. I'm very guilty of this, just myself, like Lauren, like, hey, you're gonna do the dishes tonight? I was like, no, that's tomorrow Devin's problem. And then I wake up and I'm like, man,
It's tomorrow.
past Devin sucked. Why'd you do that?
You should have just done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about Jesus, you know, he knew that he wasn't the person who was going to take the church into tomorrow, so to speak. That the most effective way to spread the church across the world was not for him to go to all these individual little places, but to train other people to know how to do that. And that's what you see him doing for 3 years. I mean, 90% of his time is not spent, you know, visiting towns and talking and giving sermons and, you know, teaching lessons and doing healings. Most of his actual time is spent helping these 12 to 70 people, depending on what time frame you're talking about, learn how to do ministry. You know, so he invested heavily. He invested his life in the future rather than being focused on, well, this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important lesson for us in churches. You know, we have a tendency in churches to think very myopically. You know, we like to think about all these little problems that we have right now in this very moment, and we don't often think about the bigger perspective. I mean, how many churches do you know that when troubles arise, the only thing they think about is how is this going to affect our church, and never even think twice about how is this going to affect the church in San Diego County or in the United States or across the world. It's pretty common, you know, when we think about our own momentary needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it applies a lot. Like I see this a lot, like in a lot of mega churches, is there's all this focus on. I mean, they have such a large number of people coming. Uh, they want to focus on those people.
Yeah.
They want to focus on the programs and uh, being a fun church to go to. I mean, that sounds pretty great to me, and that's what I did for a long time. And I'm not dissing mega churches. Like
There's a place for them in this
yeah,
world.
yeah. For some people, that's the kind of church they need, and that's awesome. But it's not really healthy for the future of the church because big churches like that aren't reaching out towards the people who need church necessarily. The people that are not really connected. Like everyone I've known that's gone to mega church has been like someone who's been in the church before, and
Big churches are filled with people who've already been Christians for a long time.
yeah. And I feel like we need to really invest in churches that are reaching the audience of the people who don't know who Jesus is, because that number is getting bigger and bigger, and the number of mega churches is just getting higher and higher. And
it's really easy to get lost.
There's a big separation happening, and I'm really hoping that's not what the future of church is going to look like, and that as Christians we can try to focus more on as much of building each other up as making more Christians. Like that's a very important part that I think we don't do because it's harder. It's harder to make more fishers of men.
Well, yeah, even in small churches, you see this happening. You know, you have small churches and large churches and mega churches. All they focus on is how do I keep my people happy?
Yeah.
And in small churches, you know, that might mean something very different than it would at, you know, a mega church. But it really comes down to is how do I keep the people who are already here happy? And we don't really spend a whole lot of time, effort, or concern thinking about the people who might be here tomorrow, the new believers. And I think that's where we're so different than the early church. I mean, granted, the early church, they were the first, you know, but they were totally focused on the future. You know, I mean, how many times did Paul go into a place and make people mad because he was preaching something that was counter to everything they knew, and that was okay because
I think just about every town he rolled into.
yes, most of the time. So, yeah, I think we can't be so small focused. You know, we have to think about the big picture. You know, we can't be so focused on the TVs and forget about the need for food, real food. Speaking of that school, early on in the movie, Cooper is called in to his kid's school. First was to talk about the son, and in that conversation, you know, the son, he's a good kid, hard-working kid, but he's not at the top of the class. You know, there's no need to educate him. He's just kind of pre-designated as he's going to be a farmer. That's all he's ever really cut out to be. Is he's comes from good farming lines, and he's going to be a farmer, and that's his entire lot in life. And then the daughter, you know, there's something else there. But you know, in that conversation, there's this, you know, Coop who's worked for NASA, who is an engineer, who's a man of science. You know, he believes in truth, you know, and truth is kind of a big subject that runs throughout this this movie. But the schools have been teaching what the daughter's there. She's in trouble for trying to speak the truth and being angry that the schools aren't teaching honestly. They're saying, for instance, that the moon landing was faked, that it was just a piece of political propaganda to be able to, for the governments of the world to spend all this money on space exploration. It just went nowhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, the world just didn't have money to spend on these kind of programs anymore. But really, the shows they were afraid of the truth. They didn't want to speak the truth. Coop then says, yeah, you had people who did away with engineers who were inventing MRI machines that could, exist in this world, but you got rid of them, and then my wife died because you got rid of all the people who were scientists and engineers thinking about the future.
Yeah.
So, it goes back to that same, conversation about myopic, this myopic level of how we, they're thinking about how do we solve this global food crisis, but ultimately the truth was making them fearful. And I think that's kind of a thing that we find ourselves in a lot of times in life. When we deal with these big problems, like the main problem in this is how are we going to feed however many billions of people are left in the world when all the crops are dying? And the truth, the reality behind that the problems they were facing, it was terrifying. And their decision was to just cover up the truth and try and make their own truth that was more sanitized and easy to digest. Jesus tried to share the truth, and he was hated for it. I mean, he was hated because he wasn't just a truthful person, but he was the truth himself.
Yeah.
And he was actually killed for that same reason. So what is it about truth that causes such adverse reactions, and have you ever experienced that reality?
Yeah, I think people just typically don't want to hear it because it challenges their beliefs and their opinions, and it's honestly easier just to cut those things out and to keep on believing what you're believing. And to keep on having those thoughts, because if you don't change it, it doesn't hurt you at all. What hurts is making the change, and it just like it makes me wonder how much maybe of our history books in school are different than what they used to be. Like how much of it has changed through the years.
History is written by the winners.
Yeah, is it Churchill that said that?
I think so. Yeah. One of those smart people.
Someone much smarter than us.
Yeah.
But it's like
I think it's actually Teddy Roosevelt.
It's possible.
But anyways,
I don't remember what I was saying.
But yeah, truth is it's I think what the problem people have with the truth is truth requires action, right? If you all of a sudden, if you have a set of beliefs that you've had your entire life, whatever that is, your entire belief system for 30 plus years maybe have been this, and then one day you're confronted with the truth that everything you knew about this thing is not accurate, this is accurate. That truth requires action. Either you have to change everything about yourself to adjust to this new understanding, or your action is to fight against it and say, no, you're wrong, that's not true. You're fake news.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we see a lot of people in Jesus' time. You had people, all they had ever known is what the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the different rabbis had taught through the years. They knew what they had read in the book of the law, traditions of the elders, and all these different things. They had this set of beliefs that their parents had taught them about their faith as Jews, and the beliefs they were supposed to have regarding Gentiles, and the beliefs they were supposed to have regarding women's role and all this kind of stuff. And then you have Jesus come in, and he's a threat to that because he presents something that is true, and he bases that truth on scriptural fact, because most of what the Jews in his time believed, they didn't really spend a whole lot of time focusing on the law. they focused mostly on the traditions of the elders. But Jesus always went back to, the law, and he would bring out this new light that comes from, God's word, and they were faced with that. What am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
Because he just rocked my world.
Mm-hmm.
But can I really change everything about myself to now adjust to this new understanding about life and faith and our relationship with God and our relationship with other people, and especially our relationship with Gentiles?
Yeah.
And what you see most of the time is people, like the people in this movie, just say, let's just get rid of the truth.
Yeah.
In this movie, they got rid of the truth by printing different stuff in textbooks. In Jesus' time, they just killed them. And that was the easier way to deal with that reality.
It's got to be so much harder to perceive that truth too if you're so far on the other end of it. Like, I think of like me being a Christian today. It wasn't too difficult being raised by a Christian family.
Mm-hmm.
But like, take you for instance. Like, I'm sure that was incredibly challenging to accept the truth that Jesus was your savior.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for someone like, that's a completely change of how you have to live your life, from going to be like, I mean, someone who would believe in maybe nothing or in evolution, to being like telling yourself that all that is wrong, and that I was created by God and I'm loved and cherished by Him. Like, that's a huge gap that you have to jump and change everything about you. And I think that is so hard and so scary that it's easier just to make the change, or easier to say, oh, well, I'm not even gonna recognize this truth and just ignore it.
And then there's the real world consequences that come from it, like rejection from other people in your life. There's when you decide that what I used to believe is not true, and I have this new belief system. You're telling everybody else that still believes that that you're wrong. I mean, that might not be how you're actually saying it, but by your actions, you're saying, I've discovered something new, and I'm moving away from you. Or, when you're talking about faith, I've had lots of conversations with people who are former Muslims, and, they get to that point where they decide, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus. You're talking about, you're basically going to be disowned. You are going to be rejected by your people because you are just now this person who's going to hell. You're I can't remember the term for it, but you're no longer one of the chosen people, and that's got to be absolutely, far more terrifying than anything I went through.
Yeah.
And I had some family who made fun of me and thought I was how could you, they didn't understand how somebody who was as messed up as I was could claim to be a Christian. But it's because they just don't get it. But truth is one of those things. That's why there's so many philosophy books that are written about it. It's such a topic of discussion by cultures around the world, because it is a universal curiosity of how do you treat truth and what do you do with it once you obtain it.
Yeah. You take it all the way back to Plato's cave analogy. It's a pretty scary truth. And going along with truth is this talk about honesty in the movie. And it kind of starts out with one of the robots making kind of a joke. And then Matthew McConaughey's character Coot kind of asks him, like, "Hey, what are your honesty settings?" And he tells him, "Oh, 90%. Full truth isn't really the best for human emotion." And he goes, 90% it is. And it's kind of a joke that is run with one of the other main characters, Dr. Brand, because she is having a hard time being honest with her relationship with one of the fellow astronauts.
Yeah.
And so throughout this movie, there's this 90% honesty that they talk about, and I was just curious, how much honesty do you think is best?
Well, I mean, I think your gut reaction, you want to say, well, 100% honesty is best. But
Yeah.
it's just not. Because I think we should be 100% honest, but we have to be careful in our presentation of truth and how
Discretion.
yeah, because there's a lot of times where I can be totally honest with people, but sometimes that honesty needs to be delivered in small bits,
Yeah.
or at least in a kinder way.
Yeah, a nicer way than the brute force of honesty.
Yeah, because sometimes honesty can be pretty stinking aggressive, and a lot of times we don't take into account the people side of that honesty.
Yeah.
What's if I walk in and say my wife has spent all day redecorating part of our bedroom, and she's really proud of what she's done. She thinks it looks great, and when I walk in, she's like, so what do you think? Now, my gut reaction is I might not like it, but I have to be very careful with how I say it's not my favorite.
Yeah.
So I can be honest, but it needs to be more of and it's probably different for different people. But I think we have to read the room as this. Which is, I think, where we get lost in our honesty. We don't read their personality and the emotion of the people that we're being honest with, and in that do some damage to relationships.
Yeah. I wish it was so much easier just to be honest. Like, I wish we could just be 100% honest with people, and you could take it and give it without any emotional damage instead of so you don't feel judged in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish that that's how it worked, but it just doesn't.
It just doesn't.
You misperceive the truth that you're being told as being judgmental or incriminating or just hurtful, and it's a bummer because sometimes you want to be honest with people.
Yeah.
I wish I could just tell them exactly how I feel, but I know if I do, that might hurt them.
Especially when there's some very real stuff that needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
I have people in my life who I see them struggle in so many different ways. And not that I have all the answers, but I have a lot.
Yeah.
Because I've struggled with a lot of the same stuff that they struggle with. And there'll be so many times it'd be just easier to be very blunt and honest and say, knock it off.
Yeah.
Stop doing that. Do this instead. But most of the time that just doesn't work. That, what's the therapist tool? It's called something, but the idea is self-discovery. That if you really want something to take, people have to discover that for themselves. If I tell Devin, hey, if you stop doing this and you start doing this, you're going to feel better. But it's probably going to click more in your mind if you discover that in your own way, in your own time. But sometimes that can take so long.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I've been waiting on you to discover this for 3 years now, and I'm getting kind of impatient.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll slide some
Yeah,
stuff.
some harder hints.
Yeah. Hey, have you read this book yet?
Hey, you should try this brand of deodorant. It's pretty cool. What do you think? What percentage of honesty do you think you're at right now, and what do you think maybe is the best number to be at?
I think I am probably in the 75 to 80%. I'm a pretty honest person. I'm not really too concerned about pulling punches. But I do realize that honesty sometimes needs to be slowed down.
Yeah.
I need to get the information out there, but sometimes it needs to be done in smaller pieces,
Yeah.
and it needs to be done in a better way. I would say I used to be set at like 90, 95.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 'cause I just didn't care.
Yeah.
You know, if you got hurt in the process, that's your problem, not mine. But that just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand what they were trying to do in this movie with the whole honesty thing, the honesty index. But yeah, I think 100% honesty is the ideal, but
Impossible.
not according to this index that they're using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like right now lately I've been, I think, brutally honest lately, which has not been good. I typically try to try to care a little bit more about people's feelings, but I've been bad about it lately. I feel like I've been around 90, and I need to dial it back because I do think like maybe 80 is a good number, leaving 20% for baby feeding them
Finessing.
the honesty.
Yeah, finessing.
It's a good word for it, finessing.
Yeah, because there's some people who can't handle it. I mean, I have a couple people in my life that if I were really honest with them, they'd be pretty upset with me and maybe even emotionally crushed. So we definitely have to be careful. Do we want to talk about they yet?
Yeah, we can talk about they.
So in this movie, there's these subtle information accumulating things that are happening. You know, first there's Cooper's daughter. She thinks there's a ghost in the house. Mm-hmm. She's not afraid of the ghost, but pretty sure the ghost is trying to leave messages.
Yeah.
So she sketches down, like these books that had gotten knocked off the shelf, and thinks there's a code in there. Later on, after this huge dust storm comes through, there's a more exact message that's left in the dust, the beams of light going through the dust. And then fast forward to when Coop makes it to the hidden NASA base, and he's talking to his old, was he a boss or professor, or he's a doctor.
He's an old professor.
Old professor. So he's talking to Michael Caine's character and finds out that there's this wormhole that's been opened up in space, which they say isn't a natural occurring phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's something that somebody has to do. So they start referring to all this stuff as the they, that there's a they out there. And they're not trying to say who they is. They don't even know who they is. They probably assume that it's some kind of alien being that sees a planet that's about to die, and they want to help. So they start providing these helps to help them figure out what to do next. And that's how they came up with some of the ideas of what they're going to do moving forward. And, just out of curiosity, how do you feel about the they conversation? I wrote some stuff down at the very beginning of the movie when they first start talking about they, that this was a supernatural being that's been trying to help the human race, but who is the they? I mean, from the Christian perspective, I think that we would, say that they is God. I wonder what God is trying to communicate, though. So let's talk first about who do we think the they was in this situation. And then if God is our they, what is he trying to communicate to us through some of these different means that we see in our lives?
Yeah, I do feel like our they is God. And I feel like a lot of times we have this they of trying to paint some higher power for something happening in the world, and a lot of people who don't believe in God still have that belief that there's some higher thing that's changing it. and they obviously they don't have any belief that it's them at all, like that they could be the ones doing this. And I think God does that sometimes where He goes incognito, and unbelievers still are like, oh, but I don't
They
know.
never addressed who opened the wormhole, though.
Yeah,
So that's, you know, yeah. As you get through the movie, you find out that the one who's been trying to communicate all this stuff
yeah,
was actually Cooper in this fifth dimensional reality.
yeah,
But they don't talk about right when the gravitational forces on Earth were changing, and they say that was what was killing Earth. So right as Earth started dying is when this wormhole opened up out in space.
Yeah.
They never really talked about the they in that situation.
yeah. Matthew McConaughey's character wants to believe that somehow in the future humans are able to create the technology to do that, but doesn't really address how did they get there if they
Yeah.
were messed up in the first place.
Yeah. There's definitely some plot holes,
Yeah,
that are there. But I think those might be intentional, to get you thinking about the bigger picture and the bigger realities. Maybe there is something.
Yeah, it leaves room for the supernatural too, though.
Yeah, the fifth dimensional being that's out there.
Or God.
Yeah.
Creating this second chance for something else. Like I like how in this when they're starting to come close to the wormhole, and one of the astronauts is getting like kind of freaked out, and Matthew McConaughey's like, "Hey, like this is just our boat. We're on a voyage to save humanity." And I mean that's what Noah was. He was on a voyage with all those animals to save all of God's creation, and that's what they're doing. They have all these embryos to kind of save humanity, and I think it's a really good illustration for God giving humanity a chance to save themselves.
Side note, nothing to do with this movie.
Yeah.
What number would you say, say there's a global catastrophe, most of humanity is wiped out. What is the smallest amount of number of humans would it take to repopulate the Earth?
To repopulate? Well, you need, like, diversity, right?
Yeah. Put your engineer brain on.
My guess would be at least 1,000.
95.
Really? Only
Somebody did the math.
95?
95 people could repopulate the entire Earth in the course of about 100 years.
I think it's funny that that's an odd number.
Somebody's having multiple partners.
He accounted for divorce somewhere.
Yeah, they're assuming that there's some multiple partner situations here. Yeah. No, at this point, repopulation is a science. You don't get to choose who your partners are.
We're Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to make sure the world is diverse. So
Yeah.
This year you're with this person. This year you're with this person. That's a whole different conversation, but off topic.
Yeah. Did you have something about the poem?
I do.
That appears in this?
So Michael Caine, he's such a great character actor.
Yeah.
And he has such a great voice. So I'm not going to read and try and pretend like I'm Michael Caine. I mean,
that'd be a pretty fun impression.
I
mean, it is just you and I now.
But I can't do it. I haven't practiced. I don't have a good Michael Caine impersonation.
He kind of like he like whispers but talks clearly at the same time.
Yeah, it's a very unique English accent. But he reads this poem, and it's kind of repeated a couple different times. It seems like it's a poem that he's been sending out with these astronauts over the years. But it's by Dylan Thomas, and this is what, as they are launching themselves towards the wormhole, that he reads out. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked with no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage, rage against the dying light. So, that rage, rage against the dying light, it's the whole poem is basically saying that we shouldn't welcome, that we shouldn't be accepting of death. And that's kind of what this whole movie is about. The human race is doomed. There is no fixing this. That they think that corn is safe, that it's going to be you're going to lose wheat. Well, we've already lost wheat. We're losing okra, but corn's doing well. So we can live on corn. But then they find out, well, no, not really.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time. So, this poem kind of is the theme of the whole movie, that you shouldn't just accept death. You shouldn't just welcome it as it comes, that you need to fight against it. You need to not just fight, but you need to rage against that dying light.
Yeah.
And so they're going out into space. That is, they're raging against that coming death. We're not going to accept the end of humanity. We're going to go out and we're going to continue on, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure that. And as I was thinking about this poem, as I read through it a couple times and heard it throughout the movie, from a Christian perspective, what is your take on that idea of not accepting death and not welcoming death?
I think that it's just, as a human, it's a natural feeling to not want death. And when I was younger, I was absolutely terrified of it. And I think one of the first things that changed when I became a Christian, when I was baptized, was I was no longer afraid of that, because I knew that the death on earth wasn't the end. And I think that was a big fear of mine to overcome, because as humans we don't want there to be an end. We want to stay in the light. We don't want to go to the dark.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful that when you learn who Jesus is and you accept him as your Savior, that you get to experience life forever. And you feel it now. You don't have to wait till you die. You feel that love and that life in you on earth. That's something I wish more people could understand.
Yeah. I never really feared death. That's never been I understand why people would fear death.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because I really haven't. I've had a couple near-death experiences, but even that, I didn't really fear death. I feared, like when I got hit by that tornado, what would happen to my kids and family if, I didn't have a dad, but I didn't fear for myself. I feared for them.
Yeah.
But I get it. I understand why people are afraid. And if we're talking here about the entire human race, though, you're talking about an apocalyptic event, the end of days. And I understand the desire to want to fight to continue the human race. But, there's just so much more out there. Beyond our plane of existence, so to speak. We and I don't want to sound like I'm a downer on human life, but there's a whole lot of pain and ugliness in this life. There's a whole lot of times where things get pretty miserable, and the life to come is going to be so much better.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of why I wanted to ask this question, just because I don't necessarily agree with the idea of raging against the dying light. Not that I want to leave this life prematurely,
Yeah.
but I don't fear the life that's to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't really feel that either.
Yeah. So, shortly after they've entered the wormhole, they've had tragedy. They land on this one planet that they think is the best option for possible habitation, but that's just really based off of bad data.
Yeah, it's Miller's planet.
Yeah,
It's giant waves.
The initial planet showed that there was oxygen and water, but time goes by. Was it 14 years or 13 years for every hour or something like that?
It was 7 years every hour.
7 years every hour. That was their guesstimation.
Yeah.
So so the information they had gotten from this planet was just, to them, it had been years old.
Yeah.
But to actually being on that planet, it was
minutes.
It had just happened.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough time to actually gather data and send it back.
Yeah.
So they land here, tragedy happens, and they have to move on to the next planet. There's 3 potential planets they're going to be looking at. So they're moving on, and then you have I can't remember what her character's name is called.
Dr. Brand.
Dr. Brand. Dr. Brand is the one who is probably the best education-wise to be making the call of which planet is the most habitable.
Mm-hmm.
So she wants to go to this planet that they haven't had any contact with the person, but the information they have,
It's the most like Earth.
is the most like Earth. It has, but it's also the furthest away.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only one shot to get there. But there's another planet that's closer, and they have had contact with the astronaut who was there before in the Lazarus.
Mm-hmm.
That was the name.
Lazarus missions.
So they had to make this choice. Which planet are we going to go to?
Mm-hmm.
And she wants to go to the planet, and it comes out via Coop that she's actually in love with the astronaut who's there.
Yeah,
Edmonds. So in that, she says, love has to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had something on this too.
Yeah. She kind of talks and goes on how she says that love is powerful and unquantifiable.
Mm.
She says it has to mean something.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we didn't invent.
Yeah.
And I think it's so true. And when Coop hears this in the moment, he says, Dr. Brand, you're not talking like a scientist.
Yeah.
Like he calls her out and says, you're a scientist. Like, come on, be reasonable.
Yeah.
And she says, that's why I'm saying this, because I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
And in the moment, Coop can't accept it. Like, he's like, no, the reasonable thing is to go to Dr. Mann. His planet shows a thumbs up right now.
Yeah.
Edmonds is far away, would use all the fuel. We couldn't make a return trip. Like, it's just, there's too many things that are maybes. But she's like, love is calling me there.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is so powerful about that moment, and then finding out that they're wrong later on, is Matthew McConaughey sacrifices himself to make sure that she gets to that planet.
Yeah.
He
because love does matter.
Yeah, because love matters.
Yeah.
He proves it to her. He proves himself wrong, and through love then finds that he is stuck in a time loop of his own daughter's bedroom. And as he's wandering around in this like infinite world, 3D world of his of his daughter's room, uh, he's talking to the robot. I forget what is it.
It's Czar or something like that.
Yeah,
Something that starts with a T and then has
Tarj. That's what
Tars.
it is. Uh, Matthew McConaughey's character says, "Love isn't something invented. Love is evidence of something higher that we cannot perceive, and just like gravity, it transcends time and space."
Yeah.
And uh, that's so true because when you think about it in terms of God's love and when He created us, and even when Jesus was on Earth over 2,000 years ago, we still feel that love over time and space. Like that was so long ago, not even in the U.S., but we can feel that love
Yeah.
that He has given us.
Yeah. We have no personal connection with him.
Yeah,
From what we would consider today, of having a personal connection with another person, we have none of that. There's
Yeah.
2,000 years and half a world
yeah.
between us, but we do.
Yeah, and with how scientific this movie is, that is something that they make a big point of, is that love is something that they cannot identify, they cannot quantify, they don't know where it comes from, and it's, I think, the biggest of the supernatural.
Yeah.
What is the cause of this in the whole movie is
One, love is even what leads, Coop's daughter back to him. Because
exactly.
she finally comes to the point realizing that no, Dad didn't abandon us here on Earth to die. He had to be going for a reason, and I know that he loved me. And then she happened to go back and pick up that watch and realize that, he was the one that was making that watch tick the whole time in that weird sporadic way.
Yeah,
and that was, it was. The love theme that runs throughout this is easily the most biblical discussion point in this whole thing. Just because, from a Christian perspective, it is beyond our human understanding of things.
yeah, and it's kind of, there's like this, I think, a really cool way of how they picture that image, and Coop finally relaying the information, and it kind of gives you the visual of him just floating in space, just dead, and then he wakes up in a hospital room, all healthy again.
Yeah.
And he gets to meet his daughter again
As a 90-year-old.
Yeah, but it's such a cool. I mean, going along with the whole Lazarus mission, like and the sacrifice and coming back to life, man.
Yeah.
Like they went above and beyond with the
Yeah, they did.
with the analogies, and then he finally gets to meet his daughter again, which I feel like is going to be like such a similar celebration. We get to heaven. We've been I've been showing this person love over time and space for my whole life, and I finally get to experience with it like face to face. It's so cool, and she says in that moment, "I knew you'd come back because my dad promised me," and I can't wait to meet God because He promised me that I would.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we get to the opposite end of the spectrum on this whole thing, the other side of humanity that we see in Dr. Man.
Yeah.
So, the crew has ended up, they made the choice to go to this planet where they had contact with the person from the Lazarus mission who had given them some hope.
Yeah.
That there was potential there. And Dr. Man, played by Matt Damon, seems initially that he's being upfront and honest, but pretty quickly he illustrates the realities of desperation.
Yeah.
He said that he knew from the moment he stepped foot on that planet that there was no life there, but he also knew that there was no coming back, that he was marooned there.
Yeah.
And so he started sending out false information about this planet having the potential for life in hopes that NASA would send somebody to him to rescue him. And then when that worked, and NASA did send people there, but those people want to stay and set up shop. He's faced with this reality. Well, what do I do? How do I cover up what I've done?
Yeah.
So he tries to kill Coop and steal a spaceship, which he does. And it's just such a. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. That he's just at this point of total desperation. He went against every bit of common sense, and because he just had to escape.
Yeah.
And he had to fix the problem. And we see people like this pop up in the Bible. There's people, who in the Bible, they do things out of desperation. Sometimes that desperation leads them to do some very bad things, but sometimes it leads them to do some pretty good things. I think of Jairus, for instance. Everything about his culture, should have told him to stay away from Jesus. He was the leader of a synagogue. He was probably under some political pressure, but all he cared about was that his daughter was sick and dying, and there's this Jesus guy that I keep hearing about. I don't care about any of this other stuff. I am going, in my moment of desperation, I am going to seek Jesus out. And it worked. He put all these other worldly things aside. He sought Jesus out, and Jesus brought her back from the dead. And I think that's a great lesson for us, that in these moments of desperation, we have to find the way to do the only thing that really matters. And in the case of what we're talking about, that is to seek Jesus. And in the case of Dr. Mann, it should have been honesty.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened. But had he been honest, they probably would have just taken him with them to the next planet. Yeah. But he just couldn't see his way around that. So desperation causes us to do strange things. Sometimes it causes you to act like Dr. Mann and be willing to kill everybody else just to save yourself.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it causes us to be like Jairus and do whatever we can to find the only real solution, which is Jesus.
Yeah.
This is a great movie, though.
Amazing movie.
Yeah, great movie.
Like I said, it's one of my top ones.
Yeah. I hope that you have enjoyed this. Next time, we didn't talk about what we're going to watch next time.
We didn't. We forgot to.
Oh. Well, I don't know what's going to be coming up. We promise that next time it will be a movie that's meant for a younger audience. This one is definitely
PG-13.
PG-13, meant for an older group that has the ability to pay attention.
Yeah. There's a little bit more language in it. Nothing terrible.
Nothing horrible, but definitely not something you would want like a 10-year-old watching.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could. I mean, I would let a 10-year-old watch it.
Yeah. This movie kind of makes me think of The Way Back. That movie where I don't know if you've seen that, but in that movie, Steve Carell plays kind of like a bad guy, and it felt so weird watching that movie. Kind of similar to this one. It feels weird seeing Matt Damon play a bad guy.
Yeah. You know what good movie we haven't done yet? As from a kid's genre is Holes.
We haven't done Holes.
We should do Holes at some point.
That would be a good movie.
I don't know if it'll be next week, but in the near future.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.